So we're here.
Can you check to see if it's live?
16 people. They have a couple of small chalets.
So go to
basically
YouTube.
like a whole chalet, and that comes to
It says 3 people are watching live. Yeah.
per week.
Okay.
Food, lodging,
We're good.
ski passes.
Sorry for the technical difficulties, everyone.
Apologies for the technical difficulties. We're about to get started.
Best economics for skiing around anywhere is skiing in France. That's ridiculously cheap compared to US skiing. $1,500 for the week.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming out. I know the ski season is fast approaching, so I really appreciate you all taking the time out of your days to come out here. So, this official PeakRankings panel going to be discussing, as you can see, skiing's 2025 reality check, what's broken, and what we can do to fix it. I'm here with three panelists: Stuart Winchester, founder and editor of the Ski and Storm Skiing Journal and podcast. My apologies. Sam Weintraub, the founder and CEO of PeakRankings and newly ParkRankings as well, and Isabel Hughes, co-founder and CEO of Statement. So, you guys want to just grab the microphone and introduce yourselves for the panel, give us a little bit more of an introduction about each of your endeavors.
Can you guys hear me? I'm Sam. I'm the founder and CEO of PeakRankings. I've been doing this for 6 years. I started as a website, then expanded into YouTube, and over the last 2 years, I've also been leading group skiing and hiking trips and helping build community in that space.
My name is Isabella. I'm the founder of A Statement, which is a legal tech software, but I'm here today in a different capacity. I'm obviously Irish, you may hear from my accent. I've been skiing since I was very, very little, really passionate parents who are skiers, skied all through Europe my whole life, and this is the first year that I'm here in the US trying to navigate the skiing scene here. So it's been really interesting getting to know Sam and Stuart.
I am Stuart Winchester, founder of Storm Skiing Journal and Podcast. Launched it also in 2019, October. I don't know when you were, Sam. But I cover lift served skiing, and I started the Storm mostly because ski journalism, I felt, had gone too far onto the fringes with its coverage and was covering things like helicopters and mountain treks that are kind of neat for about 5 minutes, but then get a little boring. So I wanted to speak to the topics that most of us are actually doing, which is skiing off a chairlift at a ski area.
That's great. All right, so just going to dive right into it. So the problem, so a lot of the issues I'm sure a lot of you have seen in the skiing ecosystem is a lot of it, like a lot of other media, just dominated by resort PR and more corporate media and things like that. And not only in the skiing space, but also in just news media as well as sports media. People are really looking for more of an independent, non-slanted voice, whether that's a specific company you're working for, or even just venture capital backed ventures. So we'll get more into that as well. But I really just want to focus on how they got into doing the ventures and websites that they have, and just talking more, realizing, hey, this is a problem. Just venture capital and more focused media. Just explain more how you identified that this was an issue and what you did to tackle it.
Yeah, so I live here in New York City, and I'm assuming you all do as well. And in order to ski, you have to drive quite a ways or take a plane. But either way, there's some travel involved. And around 2018-19, when the kids were at an age when I could ski a little more during the week, I had this brainstorm that, podcasts are kind of a thing. Let me pull up some ski podcasts and listen to those instead of streaming music the whole time. And there were a bunch of ski podcasts, but it was all bros, broing out, and they were good skiers, but they didn't necessarily have anything to say that I found particularly interesting. And no one was talking about ski areas, and that's the kind of journalism I came up on was in the 1990s when I was becoming a skier as a teenager. There was all these great magazines that really had a lot of adventure stories, but they were anchored in the resort world. So it was, here's my week at Mad River Glen. And it was a thing that you could actually go do without a producer and a guide and all these other things. It was just a story about a cool place that's unique. And as I said a few minutes ago, no one was really doing that anymore. Ski journalism was all about guys jumping off of things. It was all about powder, and it was all about the fringes. I was like, I'd gone to journalism school, but I'd ended up, which is a pretty common path, in corporate communications. And I saw this stat once, and it's probably even worse now, that there's something like 5 PR people for every journalist. And I think that's only gotten exasperated over time. So really, that's where the career opportunities were, especially when you're living in a place like this. You need to, the corporate world was a safer place to go if you wanted to have a family and live in New York City, as opposed to trying to scrape things together as a journalist, which was a declining industry. So I graduated J school in 2008, which was kind of right at the inflection point of when journalism really started to suffer from the transition to digital and not do a very good job. So anyway, I had been working at all kinds of corporate jobs. I worked at the NBA, I worked at Viacom, and I was working at Viacom at the time, and I serendipitously read this New York Times email article one day on a train. I'm going home from work, and it was talking about email newsletters and how these were the new hot thing. And I was like, okay, that doesn't quite sound right, but I'll play along. And it talked about Substack, and so I started researching these, and it really solved a big problem for me, which is that I had wanted to work in journalism. I couldn't really do it full time and leave my corporate job, but I also didn't have the know-how to set up the tech and deal with a website, and that was just a big mental obstacle. So what Substack allowed me to do is, when you start your newsletter, you have a free website, it's very simple, they do all the tech, they're constantly improving it, and the key to it was they made it very easy to turn on a paywall. So I had a professor in college who was like, if you want to be a writer, find something that no one's writing about and write about only that. So I zeroed in on skiing just because I saw this market opportunity to, not that no one was writing about skiing, but no one was writing about the type of skiing that I wanted to hear. About a lot of journalism being press releases. There was a lot of press release reprints in PR, and no one was really taking an analytical look at skiing. So launched it in 2019 and on Substack, built up an audience for a couple years. In February of 2022, so about 2.5 years in, activated a paywall. When I hit my threshold was I want to hit 5,000 subscribers and I'll activate a paywall. I sort of fortunate, I guess serendipitously, didn't seem so at the time, but I broke my leg right that same week. I was like, wow, it was February. I was like, I guess I don't have anything else to do for the next 3 months and cancel all my ski trips, so why don't I turn on the paywall? So I did that, and it actually went super well. So I built up that audience, built up the paid audience, and then in 2024, I was still working full-time at my media job. It was Paramount at the time, which sucked up Viacom. Anyway, they did a huge round of layoffs. I was caught up in that, but at that point, I was like, you know what? I can do just the storm, and I can live on this. So I talked to my wife about it, and I had a little severance to go off of, and said, it's at that point where it can be my full-time job, and it has been for the last 1.5 years, and I don't foresee that changing. This is what I look at as what I'm going to build on and finish my career with. After 30 years of working for other people, I can finally work for myself and do what I want to. So that's the story of the storm in maybe a minute too long.
Sure. So actually, I think if you had built what you had when I was starting PeakRankings, which I started September 2019, so we literally started around the same time, and I think that's really funny because I think we both recognized a lot of the same problems in the ski industry. I would say there are 2 things that pushed me to start PeakRankings. Thing number 1 is I got a full whooping of firsthand seeing how bad the ski resort duopoly was getting in March 2019 when I, on a whim, decided to join my friends in Steamboat for a 3-day ski trip. And guess what happened when I went to buy the lift tickets? Can anyone guess how much they cost? oh no. 200 a day. 200 a day. I paid. Well, actually, I paid $450 because I opened up a Capital One Quicksilver card to get the $150 signing bonus, which you get when you spend $500. Or at the time, you got like $150 if you spent $500. But still, that was $150 a day, and it should have been $200 if I hadn't opened up like a stupid credit card. So I went and I'm like, okay, Steamboat better be the best frickin' experience of my life. And it wasn't. It was like awful lift lines. Sorry, that was really loud. But the lift lines were awful. The bowl terrain was like 3 turns on the backside and that was it. The town was great. My friends were fun to hang out with, but you know, for $600 for 3 days of skiing and a not perfect experience, I was disappointed. And I just started looking at like all of the materials I'd looked at to research my Steamboat trip, and I realized I'd just been looking at websites like Ski Magazine, you know, like I honestly can't even remember, but everything that I could find was really just baked and, you know, like really, really massaged by PR agencies. There's no one who was actually telling you about, number one, they weren't even talking about how expensive it was. And number two, no one had talked about the lift lines. No one mentioned that Steamboat didn't actually have any good bowl terrain. They were only talking about the positives. So I came back from that trip, and like probably the majority of people who had started to figure that out, I just went home and sat on it and did nothing for 5 months. And then I got to the point where I'd been working in credit cards for a couple of years. There were a few events where I was like, okay, you know what? Working in this space is not for me. And then I started realizing that I didn't want to work for a credit card company anymore, and decided what is a good business idea. So just kind of like Stuart, I was like, okay, I've been working in the performance marketing space for credit cards, helping the company I work for rank as highly as possible on credit card ranking websites. What is something that I know about that has not been ranked? Because working with those companies made me realize that you will just organically get people to your website if you rank and compare them. And then it just honestly kind of clicked. I'm like, wait a minute, nobody is doing this for skiing, and nobody is talking about this from a journalistic perspective either. So basically that was the whole idea for PeakRankings, just going out there with independent reviews and using the ranking system to be the top of funnel to get people to actually watch, or at that point, like read the reviews.
I guess for me, I also can really relate to that cost aspect, especially around the lift passes. It happened very recently to me. I skied last year in Valthren in Austria. Lift passes were about $65 per day, and I was like, at the time, I was like, God, these better be worth it. Then I come over here, I did like 5 minutes, and I was like, oh my God, these would really want to be worth it. Like, they'd want to be golden lifts at this point. So it is something that you have to be really conscious about. And like that, there's so many different, you know, like paid advertising, paid marketing, all these different things. So it is really important that there is independent journalism as a whole, especially in skiing, because like that's already a high, you know, high network activity. You're putting a lot of money into it. The vast majority of us don't have money to spend on one ski trip. So I think that's a big thing, like making it accessible for everyone to do.
Does everyone know what is it Valtren?
Sorry, Valtren. Yeah.
Does everyone know what that is?
Sorry. That's a ski resort, yeah, in Europe.
The biggest ski resort in the world.
Yeah, it's huge. It's like a big, you know, it's like a big party town for half the year. The other half of the year it gets very quiet. But then also like you look, and that's very commercialized. It's very much like you are there to drink, you're there to have fun, you're there to ski. It is still very cost effective. A lot of college kids will do like college trips. Maybe like $1,000 for the whole week, ski rental, ski pass, transport to and from the airport, and accommodation included if you're with a university. That's not always the case. You're looking at other places like ZMZ, in Austria, like all these different things. Sorry, Valtren's in France, not Austria. I think it's in Austria, you're wrong. But like, yeah, there's loads of variety is my point, where there's actual cost effectiveness there too.
So I guess I have a just follow-up question more tailored towards Stuart and Sam, but just said you're able to create the websites through Substack, and so I'm not 100% sure what you use to build your website, but just with sites like Substack, and I know WordPress, I have my own website with that, where they do a lot of the tech. Would you say it's easier now to actually begin that? Because I'm sure in like the infancy of the internet and everything, that's one of the things you'd have to know, HTML and the specific coding, in addition to knowing all this information. So would you say it's easier? It's been easier now than perhaps it would have been more around the start of the internet in the early 2000s?
Yeah, and I'll say that because this is something that I wanted to do for a really long time, was to have a site, have a newsletter, have something that I owned that I could build a brand and expertise around. And you know, even with WordPress, when I tried it, it was great because there's a lot of things you can do to customize it, but I needed something a lot dumber. And Substack is like the perfect amount of dumb for me, where I can just turn it on and you can design it. And there's different templates you can use. But really, it was a matter of, I went in there, they said, name your newsletter skiing. So I have skiing.substack. And that was really all there was to it. And the thing about Substack, they keep making it better, but they're making it better in the ways that actually matter if you're a writer trying to make a living. And what I mean by that is they make referral programs, and they have their algorithms that send out discounts to your engaged readers who aren't subscribed but are likely to convert. And you can opt in or out of that, but they do all sorts of things that bring your readership up rather than making it necessarily look like the best website in the world. I'm a lot more function over form kind of person. So luckily I have my wife to offset that in real life, but when it comes to the newsletter, I really think that the content is really the only thing that matters. And as far as just enabling me, giving me a distribution mechanism to do that, Substack's great because it just sends an email out, it sends it out via the app, and it, you know, people sign up, processing payments, all that stuff is done there, and all I have to do is write. And the staging's a little annoying of articles, but.
For sure. I also feel like a lot of that too, you can more just focus on exactly what you want to focus on as opposed to kind of get lost in the details of how exactly do I want to present this, and just being able to just hand it off and say, hey, this is what I got, and send it out that way.
I love that about Substack. It's very easy to set it up, but it's actually, like I said, the content is what's most important. I have loads of friends that have created a Substack and like that, I love them. And it's super easy for them to do, but they're not good enough writers to actually monetize it and make money off it. So it's great that everyone can do it, but it's really difficult. You have to be very talented at your craft to actually be able to monetize it. So that in itself is like one of the incredible things that is there.
Panelist is not sponsored by Substack, in case anyone was wondering.
So I actually have never used Substack. I honestly wish that I knew a little bit more about this type of space when I started my business. When I started PeakRankings, I knew absolutely zero about starting a website, starting anything related to journalism. I went to school for engineering and I wrote like 0 essays after my freshman year of college. So I didn't even know that you could use another website to build a website. And just to give you guys context on how little I knew, I didn't know you could use something like WordPress or Squarespace. And my friend and I coded the entire first version of the PeakRankings website in React from scratch. And it didn't even have HTTPS, if you guys know what that means. Like, we had zero idea what we were doing. And it wasn't until April 2020 when I actually switched jobs and I had a week in between jobs that I was just like, okay, I know my friend works for Squarespace. I know I could probably build a better website in Squarespace. And so I'm gonna see if I can do it over the course of a week, and if I can, then I'll just go with Squarespace. And that is what I did. And Squarespace has had its ups and downs, but you know, it's SEO optimized, and that's kind of how that took off. But most of you actually know PeakRankings through YouTube. And I wanna actually talk a little bit about how YouTube has been a really good source for its creators. I think likely to how Substack has been really good for writers. YouTube has been really good for video creators. I think it's done a really good job of promoting my stuff. I don't think I would be here if the YouTube algorithm didn't exist. And I think that it's also done really good in terms of like helping with analytics. So if you're a creator, you can go in, you can see what videos are performing well, not just in terms of who's clicking, but in terms of who's watching and exactly what parts of the videos they're watching. So we've been able to create like the best content for you guys because we know when you're clicking, when you're actually watching the videos, and we've been able to basically understand how to make the videos better based off of that.
And then I guess just one more follow-up before we move on, just more for Stuart, just talking about, I'm just curious, did the podcast come, I'm assuming, after the Substack launched, and what was your decision behind creating that?
I did them both at the same time. So the idea was always that I always describe myself as a writer with a podcast, not a podcaster with a newsletter, and I think the distinction is important, mostly because the podcast has really acted as a really good recruiting tool, I think, for an audience, because they'll see an episode with a resort that they like, and they'll listen to that, and then they're following the rest. It's also been a really good relationship builder. You know, journalism is very based on relationships, and that doesn't mean that you're doing always what people want, and we can get into that later, but you know, the ability for people to trust you is important, and if they trust you, they will be, I've found, more open to criticism. But once I gauge them through the podcast, come to it prepared, and have that relationship, then that spreads. Ski industry is not big. It seems like it's big, but it's really very small. And everybody kind of knows each other. And so once I was able to establish contacts via the podcast, that ended up being really good for the stories, because then I started to get embargoes, get the stories before the news is out so I can write them in advance. And the reason I was able to do that, because I know that's a little weird, because I just got done saying that I don't like to do things like websites, is my wife is a video editor. So I had that secret weapon where I was able to hand that off to her, and she was willing to help me to do the podcast and edit it and create it, because I would not have been able to do it myself.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up there as well, was I was just wondering the kind of format. Was it a video? Did you have things on YouTube similar to Sam? Did you just understand, okay, who's engaging with what specifically, or? I
know, so the nice thing about Ski Podcast is, well, you're not, if I try to start a political blog, right, there's thousands of people trying to do this, but there just weren't that many people writing about skiing, but skiing does have a lot of big established brand names. So to get attention and to get people to listen, I didn't really need to do anything profound. I just had to book a name they knew. So I sent out a lot of emails, and I'd never worked in skiing and didn't really necessarily know if anyone would get back to me, but I ended up getting some good interviews right away. And the first one I put out was the leader of Killington, and everyone knows Killington, whether you ski or not. So with social media and Facebook, it's super easy, because they have all these affinity groups, obviously now, like Ski of the East. You just stick a link on there and people be like, oh, a podcast with the president of Killington, I'll listen to that. I don't know who this idiot is who's interviewing him, but I know what Killington is. And so that, just being able to anchor it to something people already knew was really valuable, and I think fortuitous and maybe unique to skiing. But again, just take sports for another example, something people have a lot of affinity to. There's a lot of sports bloggers and podcasters out there, so it would have been harder to establish that in that space. So a lot of it just comes down to picking something that has a addressable market for that's not being addressed.
All right, I think that's going to just lead into this next slide, filling the gap. So as you all spoke about, a lot of these publications and big media regarding skiing is mostly saying, oh, hey, look how beautiful our resort is, do this, that, and the other thing, but not really addressing, hey, it's going to cost you this much, because pretty much like doing everything these days, if you're a family of 4, hey, we want to go skiing here, what's the bottom line, how much are we going to have to pay, and is this actually feasible for us? And the different quirks, how are the moguls, how are the black diamonds, is this more rigorous compared to other slopes and other resorts, things like that, cost constraints, and then also, cultural shifts that happen at the different resorts. So just basing on all of that, I think you guys just spoke a little bit more about how you built the platforms, but did any of you start off in a certain place and then find yourself just expanding and maybe diverting your original vision just to meet the needs of your audience?
I would say yes, because to a certain extent, when you're building, I actually want to continue with what Stuart said about Facebook, because I actually noticed when you were posting on Facebook, because I was doing the same thing, I feel like the access to people like the CEO of Killington, that is awesome, but I would say like a solid B tier effort, like I would call it, Stuart did A tier, but I definitely tried to post my articles on there. And before I had YouTube, the way that I got people to come to my website is by posting about things that people were annoyed about. And actually, this is kind of relevant right now, but 2 of the articles that got the website traction to start were Vail Resorts getting rid of trail maps at their ski mountains, which they later actually walked back. Like they didn't get rid of like designing trail maps, but they got rid of all the physical ones and they went only to digital. And then the second was when Killington, Copper, Mount Bachelor, and Snowbird introduced fast tracks, and that got a lot of attention. So one thing I would try to do is I got on the Twitter feeds of every single ski resort in North America, and if they announced something, I would like go on my computer, I would try to pound out like a 2-paragraph article over the course of 5 minutes and get it up before anyone else. So that all being said, the ones that did the best were the ones that covered breaking news, and specifically things that talked about people's pain points. But with that being said, once I kind of figured out YouTube was going to be a more sustainable growth strategy, just putting up videos that talked about, like the true experience of being at a resort, not like fluffing them up, actually getting into the stuff people don't really like to talk about, like, what is the crowding going to be like at specific lifts? Like people will always talk about lift lines now, but they won't talk like, at Steamboat, the backside lift is a choke point because there are 5 other lifts that go into it. They're not going to talk about how at Lake Louise, the facilities have been a problem. This isn't the fact anymore, but like when I went there for the first time, it was a problem because one of the lodges was placed too low, so you couldn't actually really stop in for a mid-mountain break. Just things like that. I think that's what really grew the channel, because ultimately PeakRankings from, I would say, like 2021 through 2024 was primarily just a YouTube channel. I think discussing those things was what really helped build the brand, and I think probably built the trust when, I know a lot of you in the audience have actually been on the trips or coming on the trips, but I imagine that's probably part of the reason why you had the trust to go on those trips. So I guess I would just say that it was really important to be covering not just the headline things, but the things people cared about, and weren't necessarily gonna like get a viral bite from a Facebook group.
Yeah, I started with a focus on the Northeast, sort of as a pilot, and I started, I don't know if it was more just hot takes or just quick takes about what was happening in skiing. The more I got sources, the more I started to do source journalism, and I also very quickly moved into the rest of the country. What I found is, where I fill in the gap in this ecosystem the most, or try to, I guess, is rankings, I think, are hard because you need a lot of inputs. And so I respect what you're doing, and I saw that Ski Magazine just dropped their annual rankings, and I know they get thousands of inputs for that, and it's tough to do. So where I focused my energy was on how people access the ski areas, and that comes down to these multi-mountain passes, Epic, Icon, Indian Mountain Collective being the national ones, but there's all kinds of regional variants and day variants, and these things keep multiplying. And so what I've begun to do, or have done over the years, is evolve more toward a critical perspective of, okay, what are the past products that are available? What are the best ones for value? Which ones should you actually get? And what mountains do they actually get you access to? And what do you actually get from those passes and that access once you dig below the brand names? So, for example, the Indy Pass, a lot of people look at that and say, oh, there's nothing worth traveling for on there. But they have great mountains. If you look at Idaho, for example, they have these two mountains, Tamarack and Brundage. They get 300 inches of snow a year, they have high-speed lifts, they have good vertical. Sun Valley, for context, gets about 200 inches of snow a year. And it's big and it's famous, but if you are a skier and you want the best ski experience, you should probably go to Brundage, not Sun Valley. The same is true of, for example, Deer Valley, which is kind of the best ski area because they keep saying it is, but when you really look at it statistically, it's probably the 6th best ski area on the Icon Pass in Utah out of 6. It's a very conscientious, decades-long branding effort that says Deer Valley is great because we say it's great. Is it? It's okay. And it's about to be the 4th biggest ski area in the country because they massively expanded it. But hey, if you want to do a case study on marketing and branding, look at how Deer Valley convinced everyone that it's the best ski area in America when it's not even the best ski area in Park City. So that's what I was trying to get at is all right, let's stop following the crowds around and going to the same 25 places. Let's see, with all this access we have and all these passes, what can it actually get us and what is under the hood in these 500 ski areas that we have in America?
Yeah, I think both brought up some really good points there, and then kind of just going back to what you said initially. And was it Deer Valley you said, or Steamboat? My apologies. When you went to Steamboat, you're kind of just looking around and thinking, oh, this is bad. And I feel like there's obviously websites like I'm sure like Facebook groups, as you mentioned, and then also Reddit threads of people talking about this. But I feel like it is something more when you say, hey, this really isn't as good as everyone thinks it is, and here's an actual reputable journalist or website or YouTube video actually commenting on it. I feel like that brings more credence, and also it seems like, especially with Vail bringing back their reversing on their policy, it's more of a way to say, hey, this is what people are thinking, and more of a legitimate voice than, oh, it's just some rumbling from a couple of people who came to our resort.
Yeah, I do just want to clarify one thing. Steamboat was not a bad experience. It was just a bad experience for $200. And the other thing, I actually thought of Deer Valley as case study number 2, as like a resort that, was just known for being really good and, was not worth the money. So I think Deer Valley is another perfect example. A third might be Buttermilk and Aspen, but you're also right next to the other 3 Aspen resorts. What was your question again?
More just, you just found that through both your publications, actually driving some change as opposed to actually getting a lot of these resorts to actually listen to the concerns of their clientele, as opposed to just grumblings amongst a couple people they could say online.
So I think it's hard to measure that. I would like to think that, they're listening. I know for a fact that they listen or watch both of us, because Stuart and I have now been fortunate to be able to build some contacts, and we've heard firsthand that they've watched some of our stuff. I think that, what we're doing is probably more effective for informing the audience, and then, the members of the skiing public, if there's enough, pressure from the members of the skiing public, I would probably say that's what affects change. I don't know, Stuart or Bella, if you have a different opinion, but that's probably what I would say.
I wonder, is it hard then, like you said, you're building up these contacts in these big companies, is it hard then, for example, if someone from the company comes and they say, hey, listen, we're going to give you this all-access free pass to Steamboat in exchange for a really positive article. Has that ever happened, or how do you think you'd actually kind of manage that aspect? Because from their point of view, this could be a great source of of marketing. And how do you deal with it?
So I will answer that, and then I think Stuart has more connections than I do, so I'm going to pass it over to him. I have been offered free passes and free lodging. In terms of media passes, if they do a policy of giving media passes to everyone, that is a situation where we will accept those media passes. Free lodging, I've never accepted free lodging. I've been offered it multiple times within the last 2 weeks, actually. But I think for now, we're probably gonna pass on that. But I'm gonna give it to Stuart because he, I think, has connections with higher up people than I do.
Yeah, so I'll say there's never been a quid pro quo of, you know, we'll host you and you give us positive coverage. At this point, everyone in the ski industry knows my brand, and they know that the only thing I care about is the truth, and that's what I'm gonna write. They also know that if I have something critical, I will get their side of it, right? So that's not really been something I've had to deal with. I think in general, the ski industry is pretty good at taking criticism, as long as they feel like it's fair and you're not just trashing them. I've never had a situation where I wrote a negative article and then had someone cut off contact with me. I mean, for example, I just released a podcast with the CEO of Altera, and I've been very hard on Altera about a number of things, including their day ticket product, the Icon Session Pass, which is just an awful product. But it's not me just throwing the hand grenade. I'm giving my reasons why, and you know, comparing it to the rest of the market. So they understand that, and you know, I think that if you agree with everything I'm saying, I'm not doing my job. As far as change, I don't know. You know, I don't know if they'd admit ever that they changed anything because of me. But my hope is less to change what ski areas do and more to change how people talk about skiing, because I want there to be more people like me and Sam who are doing this. Because when I worked at the NBA, and if, you know, I worked there when LeBron James made his decision, right, to go to Miami, and there were just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles about this, and there's this whole group of journalists who all they do is write critically about the NBA, and they have all this great analysis. And I feel like in skiing, when something happens, there's just not that critical volume of good, thoughtful analysis about it. And that's the kind of stuff I like to read. So I'm hoping to change that conversation, and the reason I say that is because while the ski industry is pretty good at taking criticism, skiers are not, about whatever their home ski area is. It's part of their identity. If you ski someplace 100 days a year, they will not tolerate an outsider, a lot of them, not everyone, saying something critical about their mountain. And that's just a reality. And you know, I get it. Some guy from New York City is telling you there's a problem with your mountain. I know how that comes across, but I do think there's more room to take a more thoughtful look at skiing than just saying that it's too expensive and it's all about corporate greed. And I think there's a lot of nuance in there, and that's the sort of change that I'm hoping to nudge along by example, the sort of stuff that Sam and I are trying to do.
Actually, just speaking of skiers not being able to take criticism out there, resource that they like, I actually have a close friend who's big into skiing, and I've just dropped Sam the name of PeakRankings multiple times, and every single time I do, he goes to some mountain in New England, I believe Vermont. I want to say Killington, but I'm not 100% sure. And he's like, oh, he ranked at this? Whoa, what does he know? And I think, like you said, it's really good to more be objective, especially, obviously there's different points, whether it's sports or skiing in particular, where you're all going to have your different biases, and like, hey, I prefer this resort, like you said. There's like the worst one in Utah, even though it's ranked the best, but I think it's just super important to realize, okay, I'm just trying to be as objective as I can. And really, I think that's how you get a lot of people to keep coming back and say, all right, he's tough, but it's nothing here's unreasonable. He's being very fair. So I think that transition to the next slide. So new voices at a pressing time. So both publications have grown as several acute crises have hit the winter sports world. Among these are skyrocketing costs that shut out newcomers and working families that I alluded to earlier, out of control lift lines that are spurred by the unlimited passes, and affordable housing crises in skiing towns, and destination resort duopoly that reshapes the industry. Some could say for better, some could say for worse. So I guess I think it's just very important because of the independence that the two of you have to actually realize these issues as they come up and lead more as a trusted name that know you're not backed by any resort. And so I guess we can kind of get into it as well for the next slide. But how do you go about navigating this while not taking in as much potential venture capital money or things like that? Have you been approached by that at all? Or actually, that's kind of jumping the gun here, but is there what's your process as far as what you want to tackle? I know the both of you said that you want to cover things that most other places are talking about, but how do you separate, say, some news comes out, how do you delineate, oh, I'm going to write about this first and then tackle this after the fact?
For me, it's been a process of seeing what people are interested in, and also, I wrote a piece recently for the 6-year anniversary of the storm saying what I'm trying to do, and one of those things is to identify skiing's actual problems. Sometimes they're different than the perceived problems. One of the things I've been writing about a lot lately is a lot of the chairlifts that we ride in this country were built in the 1960s and 70s, and they'll last a long time. They're good machines, and they've done a lot of maintenance on them, but they're not going to last forever. And new chairlifts are millions and millions of dollars, and they keep getting more expensive at the same time as it's getting the number of old lifts that can be relocated to mountains have moved. So I've been having a lot of conversations recently with operators who are kind of running toward this cliff and don't know what to do. And there's really no good answer, because the duopoly that people talk about is Vail and Altera, but there's also a duopoly in chairlift companies. There's only 2 big manufacturers that make them in America, and the prices have gone up and up and up. And they're not offering the sort of low-tech solutions that a small ski area will be like. So if you look at New York, for example, there's 50 ski areas in New York. 8 of them have high-speed lifts. The rest are family-owned operations, and in most cases, a new chairlift would cost more than the assessed market value of the ski area. So what are you going to do? I mean, it's hard to justify putting a piece of equipment into a business that's worth more than the business, right? And I'm not a business guy, so maybe that does make sense in some long-term penciling out way. But I'm trying to, and the podcast is a good platform for this. What are the issues that really matter to you? Because there's a lot of perceptions of cost, but U.S. skiing just had its second highest visitation ever last winter, and it wasn't a great snow year. It was an okay snow year. 7 of the last 10 winters have been the highest on record visitation-wise. The passes are driving people to the mountains, it seems. So there doesn't seem to be, whatever affordability problem there is, it's not keeping people from skiing because people continue to ski. So I don't spend a lot of time on that. I do spend time with, okay, there's a lot of different ways to save money. What's the best for you? Because there are so many products. And yes, there absolutely is laziness penalty or an ignorance penalty, or we're going to say it, for showing up and not researching ahead of time how much this was going to cost. But really, it's a matter of what is it actually taking to keep skiing running, and what is actually impacting operators. I guess I look at that side of it more than consumers, but consumers with the pass side of it.
Yeah, I would say that in terms of these types of issues, YouTube rewards making videos that people want to watch, and in a lot of ways, the videos that we've put out and have performed well have had to deal with 2 of these issues. I think lift lines in the duopoly, I think we haven't done as good of a job of covering, the barrier to entry for newcomers and the affordable housing crisis, both of which I actually feel pretty bearish on for the long-term, strategy of the sport. So believe me, like, we're trying to figure out like ways to create clickable thumbnails that we would get to be able to justify the investment in a video for something like that. But I'm very worried that it is not easy enough for people who have not like the willpower to go and commit to skiing before the season starts. I'm worried that the industry isn't investing enough in those types of people, and I think they're starting to realize it with those new friends and family tickets, but if it gets to the point where the people who are really invested in skiing age out, because I think, and I mean, Stuart might disagree with me on this, but I think that the reason why visitation has gone up so much is that people who have skied in the past, they're committing to these subscription style pass products, and if they would have skipped a vacation in like 2015, even if it's a bad snow year, they're committing ahead of time and they have the passes and they're going to lose the money if they don't. So I think it is really, really important to, not only talk about these issues, but also try to appeal to the widest audience possible. And that's also part of the reason why I've tried to put out videos that I would go to someone in a coffee shop or whatever and ask if they'd be interested in clicking on it, because you want people who don't care about skiing to be engaging in the content. And I think YouTube's actually an incredible platform for that. So that's something I'm really working on. I want for the majority of my videos, I would say for 3 out of 4 videos I put out a month, I would hope that someone in a coffee shop who knows nothing about skiing would be interested in clicking on it. And I think that is something that's going to be really important going forward to get more people in the sport. Because within the next 10 to 20 years, I'm afraid that like we aren't recruiting people hard enough to be invested enough in the sport to support the industry as it is today.
The EU has a slightly different take on it. The EU is the European Union. They give a lot of funding to a lot of different types of sports, ski being one of them. That's why a lot of our lifts are, you can argue that some of the quality of the lifts, some of them not so much, but they do, the matter of fact is they do give money towards the upkeep of the ski towns, the ski lifts, and even the snow. They are consistently giving money to protect the sport. Where there are issues that I see around, like the housing crisis, specifically we've seen it in Europe, when large corporations are coming into towns and they're basically pricing up the locals, there is tensions rising. There are issues for these people that have grown up in these towns, they want to be involved in skiing, they want to live there, their home's there, their family's there, and all of a sudden there's tourists coming in that are renting their home out for the next year, or larger corporations are coming in and pricing them out. They literally can't compete with the wealthy tourists coming in. We've seen it in Barcelona, which happened really recently. We saw, a lot of the locals actually are really frustrated at Airbnb in particular. Everyone who owned a house started to rent it out to tourists rather than actually renting it to locals. And the locals ended up actually revolting. They ended up turning around, spraying water guns at people, throwing fruit and tomatoes at people in the street. And really it was, to be a tourist in Barcelona at the time, you'd want to be pretty brave. But it really was, Catalonia's way of saying in Spain, this is not acceptable. We want our town, yes, we want it to be for tourists that drive a lot of money and a lot of economy to the area, especially in tourism, but it is ultimately for us. So there is definitely a fine balance there that I'm not sure the duopolies are respecting. I think that we're starting to see it in a lot of towns across the US, that locals are starting to become very frustrated with the fact that they're being priced out of their own homes. It's something that I feel very strongly about. And at the end of the day, you don't want to go skiing and have the locals start pelting you with fruit. That's not an enjoyable experience for you or for the locals. So I think that's something that could definitely be touched on with one of the issues skiing.
If you skied in Park City last December, you might have experienced this already.
So I guess kind of a follow-up to that. So obviously, this point you are pointing out, hey, like the affordability and affordable housing crisis in these ski towns. Do you feel as though it's your responsibility not only to just report that this is going on, or do you offer any solutions? Obviously, it's only so much you can do, but is that something else that you, part of the aim of the audience you're trying to reach, or is it more just the identification of these issues, just so people know before they go and can know going forward?
One of the cool things about covering skiing from coast to coast is seeing the variety of ideas that are out there. And one of the reasons I started and focused on lift surf skiing, I just love ski areas. And I love the variety of them. And I love how you just take a simple concept like cut some trails on a mountain and get a way for people to get to the top. And you can just take that basic template, and there's so many different ways that can express itself. And I love how skiing is this coming together of nature and sort of landscape design and art, of humans creating this place where other people can play and explore. And so we have 509 active ski areas in America, and it's 509 very different ideas, even the ones owned by the same companies. And so what I try to do when there's a big problem is look for where that problem has been solved. So to give you an example of something that I push a lot is when you get these really popular fast lifts that have a lot of people on them, they serve a terrain park, but they also serve a bunch of other stuff. In the Midwest, they're doing this really cool thing where they have these high-speed rope tows, because the park kids in general, the teenagers, they don't care about a fast chairlift. All they care about is getting as many laps as possible. And so what they've done in the Midwest, and they started, it's a natural thing to do here because the hills are 200-300 vertical feet, is they just put them in, they go super fast, so they're not used, rope tow used to be something made for beginners, and now the kids just swoop down and they take it up and the capacity, okay, to give you an idea, the capacity of a high-speed quad operating at maximum capacity with no stops, fully loaded, is 2,400 skiers an hour. The capacity of a high-speed rope tow operating at maximum efficiency is 4,000 skiers an hour. A new high-speed quad is going to cost you $8 million. A high-speed rope tow is going to cost you less than $100,000. All right, so there's an example of a problem that one part of the country has done a really good job of solving. Get the kids out of the lift line, give them their own lift, they don't care anyway, all they want to do is hit the jumps as many times as possible. So you don't, and then your $8 million lift that's right next to it is actually going to be used for more of the purpose, the maximum purpose you want it for. So it's more things like that, like, okay, what is actually working and where? I do a lot of contrasting between, to touch on the affordable housing issue, between the way things are built in the American West and the way things are built in British Columbia. British Columbia has done a really good job of eliminating bureaucratic obstacles to building. For example, below Cyprus in BC, they're building a village right now for 10,000 people. And they're building out of the wilderness, and it's going to be dense and walkable and have commerce and all sorts of things. You could never, ever, ever do that in the United States, which is part of the reason why some of these mountain towns have housing problems, because it's so hard to build anything. And of course, short-term rentals, there's a lot of reasons behind it. It's very complicated, obviously, but what I'm always trying to do is identify and then say, okay, well, and understand, we talk to all sides and see what the issue is, but also what is everyone else doing out there, and who has solved this problem already?
Yeah, I would say that, like I said, it's a little bit harder to report on affordable housing, I think in part because of the fact that, number one, it's a little bit less of a, attractive issue to people who are watching my channel. But to another extent, I think it's a hard question to tackle. Obviously, Vail tried to build affordable housing and then they were shut down. I can't remember exactly what happened, but there was like some governmental reason, regulatory reason they were shut down. I would also say that if you look at places like Washington and Oregon, they're having trouble even building like on-site lodging at their ski resorts because of, the situation in, those states with land. I guess in terms of, going forward, someone is going to hopefully figure out a solution. And then once they do, hopefully everyone else will, go about that. I know in June, there was the budget bill where they were proposing selling off federal land. there were a number of reasons why, I didn't think it was a good idea for the ski industry the way that it was framed. But, if there were a way to repurpose some of that federal land that is close to ski resorts and somehow build affordable housing on it, there could be situations in which that could help the sport continue to grow for the long term.
Do you think that there's any onus on the people that are going skiing to look for areas that they say, right, I know in this area that I'm going to go skiing, there's not an affordable housing issue, or do you think that's actually on the ski resort as a whole? Who does the actual responsibility fall on? Is it us as the consumer, or is it the resort?
So actually, that's a really interesting question because it was asked specifically, I think in a lot of forums over the last couple of days about the Altera Reserve Fast Pass strategy. And I think a lot of what the ski industry said was, don't blame the people who are actually paying for that, blame the resorts for offering it. And I think, one could construe that similarly for going on a ski vacation. If you're paying and you're, taking, let's say for example, you work a job and you have saved up to go skiing, and you're basically spilling out 6 months to a year's or 2 years worth of savings to go on this trip. I don't think that the onus should be on you versus the resort towns that it's their job to make the experience as good as possible and to attract more people. I don't necessarily think that it should be on people like the average person to, if you know what's going on, that's a different story. But if you're an average person, 95% of people go skiing and it's your job to decide what resort to go to, it's probably not as much on you as it is on the resort runners, who want to attract more people to come. And eventually these crises will boil to a point where there is a serious problem, with the Park City Ski Patrol strike that happened last December being a really good boiling point on that. If you guys don't know what happened, Park City Ski Patrollers asked for a raise from, I believe, $21 an hour to $23 an hour for their base pay. The resorts elsewhere in Utah that were comparably sized were paying their employers, their ski patrollers more. This is just for the base price. They were paying higher up ski patrollers more, but that ended up culminating in a strike that ended up being a huge stain on Park City. Really, really screwed people on their vacations during a critical holiday period, and I would argue was a very strong contributing factor to the Vail CEO getting fired. I would also say that, resorts in terms of, affordable housing crises, something that I really hope resorts aren't taking as a lesson is cutting costs in critical areas. Another thing that happened last year was there were a couple of high-profile lift accidents that likely happened due to, deferred maintenance. I'm gonna pick on Brandon here, but he was actually at Kicking Horse when that gondola fell off. So basically there were 3 incidents last year at least at major resorts where a chair carrier either slipped off of where it should have been or fell from the lift because of deferred maintenance. And we really don't want those things happening. So that's, I think, to answer your question, what I'm more worried about. I'm not necessarily saying I think it's on the consumer to do something. I think it's on the resorts to prevent the brain drain of people who should be actually, providing the critical services before it's too late.
No, I think, agree 100%. Thank you for sharing that. But also just speaking on those lift malfunctions and everything, those are obviously things that resorts will have to address, but it's not going to be not what they want to be at the forefront. And so I think that's also a benefit of you all having no venture capitalist backing, or and it says industry ties, but obviously you have your connections and everything, but starting independently completely on your own. So if you just wouldn't mind, could just talk about how you were able to build this sustainable reporting infrastructure at a time like this and actually reporting more pressing issues that are facing the skiing world?
Yeah, sure. It just goes back to the founding of the Storm. It was sending a lot of emails and seeing who answered to get those contacts. skiing is, like I said, an undercovered industry. I think there's a lot of local interest and less folks trying to do it nationally. So, but it's one thing to get someone to answer an email. It's another to keep them and answer your email. And like I said, a small industry. So how do you build the trust throughout the industry? What I found is just coming prepared and not wasting anyone's time. If someone's running Steamboat, I don't want to show up and say, oh, I didn't really prepare, and what's the name of that lift? I want them to understand that I cared enough about the interview to really come in with a good base of knowledge and did that homework. So that was, I think when you come in without resources or reputation building is kind of everything. So that's what I put everything into was, let me build myself up as a trustworthy person who is not always going to say what you like, but is going to at least do it right in an informed way and conduct themselves in an informed way. So that sort of reputation is what I focused on, because VC backing, or I still barely understand what that is. So I certainly don't have any of it, and that's why a platform like Substack, where I could someday monetize it pretty easily without having to figure out how to do it other than push a button, was good for me.
Yeah, so I came from an interesting world where I worked in the corporate world of credit cards, and before I quit to take PeakRankings full time, my last job was at a VC-backed, I guess it was a startup when I started there, but by the time I left, it was pretty big. So a lot of people actually left that company to start VC-backed companies themselves. And, I potentially had the option of getting some backing to build a better website or whatever. But actually some of the leaders at that company suggested I shouldn't take that route. I think a large part of it was because of the fact that, when you have a media outlet and you already have a following, no amount of money is going to be able to change that. It can accelerate it, but it's not going to change that. But I think another part is, there are actually a lot of ski resorts that are owned by private equity. So, you don't necessarily want to get into a place where you're being funded by you have a round of funding and you're getting involved with a private equity firm that might have ties to someone who might also be invested in like a ski resort. And I don't honestly think that would have been a problem with PeakRankings given the, I could be wrong, but there was one time where I actually did entertain conversations with a group that was maybe the closest that I got to getting others involved with the business, where they wanted to turn it more into like a straight up just like really polished website, kind of in the way that Bread Ventures, if you guys know traveling credit cards, does. And they wanted to pivot it more towards, like affiliate deals and things like that, rather than independent journalism. And I didn't really think that was the right move. And I think, if we had gone that way, I think my wallet probably would have been more secure faster, but we wouldn't have the focus that we do now on independent journalism. And I think, that's why you see companies that are owned by like these much bigger conglomerates. Like, I'm not going to name names, but if you look at these other skiing magazines, I would assume they're owned by bigger conglomerates. They actually advertise with Vail Resorts, Alterra, or they accept advertisements from Vail, Alterra. If you go to those websites, you'll probably see an Icon Pass or an Epic Pass, add on there, at least for some sort of skiing gear or whatever. I don't think that's what really Stuart or I are about. I know Stuart does take some advertisers, but from what I've seen on the Storm, they tend to be a lot more mom and pop and much more local. I actually will hand it back off to him to let him explain, but I don't think that you're seeing like those massive mega corporations advertise with him.
So I have been able to supplement subscription revenue via Substack with advertisers for the podcast, And the basic criteria is, as long as it's not something that I actively cover. So for example, I don't cover weather. Open Snow was a partner for a while. Slopes app that tracks your ski day is one of my partners. I don't really cover ski tech. So I couldn't work with Jackson Hole, for example, if they wanted to sponsor the podcast. But there's a lot of sort of niche brands that want access to my audience because it's a very specific audience. So one of my biggest advertisers is a executive recruiting firm, and they focus on the ski industry. And because that's who I interview on the podcast, they know that other ski industry types are listening to it. So yeah, the advertising has been a nice little. It's a very small portion of my revenue, but it's, you know, it's definitely worth something that we want to grow and continue to, but in a way that doesn't conflict with the journalistic mission.
And kind of just piggybacking off of that, I'm sure that while a lot of these VCs coming and saying, hey, we'd like to actually fund, really like what you're doing and pivot in a different direction, I'm sure, do you think that, I've seen this a lot of times where, sure, the audience grows, but I think the people who were there originally may realize, oh, this has actually changed. It's not exactly what I was looking for to begin with. So you think that's something that, yes, your audience will grow, but it wouldn't be exactly what you set out to be. It's more so just pivoting to, you're more, I guess, more, just trying to figure out how to say this. You're more basically stuck listening to the advice of your backers as opposed to saying, no, I want to actually continue to cover these things specifically, and my audience, like Sam said, it'll grow and things will happen, but it may not just be the same rapid rate. Would you say that's?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say right up front, no one's ever come to me and said, hey, I'll give you X amount of money for the storm. I've never been approached in that way, but I'm done having bosses, and I don't need to have one. You know, it's a good little small business, and what I care about most is making it the best ski newsletter that I possibly can. And I'm not just being idealistic. This is literally what I've been working my whole life to get to. And so I don't need to try to flip this into something else. I'm very happy with what it is and with the organic growth. And again, having all that stuff on Substack that just helps me grow the newsletter. That's if the content's good, that's where the growth comes from.
I come from startup world. I mean, Sam and I actually met at like a startup run club where a lot of time founders are considered to be successful. A lot of the time actually based on how much money they've raised versus how successful the actual business is, which is something that I always find is, I'm sure you probably think that's absolutely crazy and goes against having a good business, but it is kind of celebrated. I guess then for you, like, I mean, you're surrounded by startup people all the time. Is there ever that urge to say, okay, this is like $100,000 business now, we could make this $100 million if I were to get VC money and really kind of accelerate the business, really focus on marketing, you know, really paid content, all that kind of stuff. Is there ever that temptation there, or do you think that you'll kind of stay with organic growth, or what do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely did have that temptation at some point. It has been years since I've had that though. I think that the big period when I kind of realized this was not ever going to work as a, like a venture-backed company was when I actually got my first penny from PeakRankings. And that was in December 2021 when I reached 1,000 subscribers, and I literally turned on YouTube AdSense. And before that, I was like, okay, I don't know if anything that I'm doing is actually going to be a monetizable business in the first place. And I was thinking like, okay, if I want to grow this, I might need to like get backing just in order to keep it going. But obviously I didn't want to, but I was like, to make this, something that I do long term, it might have to happen. Right after that, I realized, wait a minute, there's actually money in making YouTube videos, and I just then basically what happened was I needed to scale by X amount. I think I needed to scale by like 12 times what I was making at that point. But I was like, there was an actual goal in mind to get, enough money to be doing this full time. And basically after that point, I was like, okay, this doesn't make sense to go and get venture funding. The first 5 months that I quit my corporate job in July 2023. I was still 2.5 times below that revenue goal of what I needed to make in order to, like in terms of my annual income, what I needed to actually like have this be a sustainable full-time job. It sucked. It was really, really nerve-wracking, and it did actually get to the point where I was able to achieve that, that revenue number that I needed by March of that year. But still, I think, at that point, the question wasn't necessarily, do I get funding? It's, how do I make my life more sustainable? Because I think a little bit, unlike Stu, once I got to the point where I had a YouTube channel, it was great that it was, providing me sustainable income, but running a YouTube channel and having that be your only income is so stressful. Like if a video doesn't perform, it doesn't just like make you feel bad, it actually can mean the difference between hundreds or thousands of dollars. And that's why if you watch the channel, you might notice that like all of our videos are designed in a specific way, or at least actually up until a couple months ago, all of our videos have been designed in a specific way. Because we needed to design the videos that way in order to actually, pay the bills and, pay for the business to operate. I'm so incredibly fortunate that we tried pivoting into running group ski trips, and that has so far succeeded. This is a much more reliable source of income. It's not as much income as the YouTube channel, but in terms of like being able to get someone to come on a trip and commit, it is a lot more, it's something you can plan for several months in advance. We're still learning, but we're getting to the point where we now want to release all of our trips at least 12 months in advance. That gives us, a really good opportunity to understand how much money we'll be taking in. And because of the fact that, we're running these trips, we can actually pivot back to like creating some of these videos that aren't necessarily designed to go viral. Like the Nevados de Chillán video we put out in August. That video flopped from a YouTube standpoint. Like I didn't even make enough money to pay the video editor who I, had work on that. But because we got 7 people to sign up for our Chile trip for the following year, that video was an insane return on investment. So like now that we're still figuring it out, but now that we're running these trips, it is actually like a sustainable way to, I feel like the right word to actually say is subsidize this content, and to even move away from like kind of the YouTube trap of having to put up content that is specifically going to go viral on the algorithm.
It's so interesting. I was an athlete for a year before I went into the startup, and one of our coaches used to always say to us that you'll never actually get better until you start to enjoy yourself, and that's hard when you're doing it, being an athlete full time, because like that, there's no money coming in the door other than what you make. But I think it does apply the same to work as well. If you enjoy what videos you're making, you're doing it not from a point of stress, but like you're actually doing it because you really enjoy it and you're talking about things that you enjoy. I think that's probably when authenticity comes through and people start to connect with you, they start to connect to the content because it's genuinely enjoyable, it's not a stress in your life.
And kind of just going off of that too, just obviously the stuff that you enjoy, stuff that you're really passionate about, may not always be anything that's going to be in favor or putting some of these resorts in the brightest light, or criticizing them so it's not singing their praises, like more PR-backed things that you'd see in different magazines and their social media. So Stu, I was actually just wondering, how do you, you said you just interviewed the CEO of Altera, so how do you maintain your journalistic integrity while also maintaining these relationships and not trying to step on toes, so to speak?
I think the answer is that I never worry about it. And the next time that I don't write something because I'm worried about how someone's going to react, the newsletter is over. Like that's the second it dies, because the only reason to start something like this is to, I mean, yeah, I wanted to build a little business, but I didn't know if that would happen. But I knew it wouldn't happen if I wasn't honest. And that's what built it, and ending that is what would kill it. And as long as I'm not just trying to be the TMZ of skiing and do hit pieces, which I'm not, any critical story I've put out, I've given people an opportunity to give their side. And if I didn't get their answer then I will certainly give them the opportunity afterwards if it comes up. So it's really about putting the journalism first and really making that the only thing. Otherwise, you just end up being a PR show. And fortunately, like I said, there hasn't been any issues of access. I guess the one thing, I guess I can give one example of, I tend to like to, when I have someone on the podcast, give them topics ahead of time, because I want them to be able to think about it. And I'll say, Vail, Altera has never come back and said, we won't talk about this, or and I don't give them the veto power. Anyways, I'm telling you, I'm gonna ask the question. In a few cases, people have said, well, I won't talk about this, and I canceled the interview. So, and they were good interviews. They were big ones. They would have gotten me listeners. They would have gotten me followers. But you have to be willing to give up some of that temporary gain in order to long-term remember what the mission is. And that's really just to make sure skiing has an independent voice, approaching it from a journalistic point of view.
And Sam, now you can answer that as well, but I know you're more YouTube focused and everything, and I've watched a bunch of videos just talking about how different YouTube videos perform, and a lot of it is, I think a lot of the stuff that people get to click on is more reactionary and more negative focused things. So is that something you've seen be more successful, or is there something else that that has led to a video being very successful, or not as much as you think?
Yes, in the short term. But I think in order to actually build like a sustainable channel, you have to put up, content that's not necessarily just gonna get like those viral outrage clicks. You have to build stuff that people actually wanna watch over time. One thing I think we've gotten a lot better at over the last 12 months is, what we've done is, in the past, there were certain periods where we wouldn't put up a video if we didn't have a title and thumbnail that would get enough clicks before even starting the script. Like some of the videos you guys have seen did not even start getting scripted before the packaging for the YouTube title and thumbnail were put out. But what we've gotten better at is actually taking those videos that we think will be valuable for the audience long term, and then figuring out a title and thumbnail from there. A couple of examples of those videos have actually been, more videos that have been live, where rather than us, talking about, oh, Vail did this terrible thing, it's us going into this run that's really inaccessible to the average person. Like, for example, Snowbird Pipeline Couloir. Doing a run like that, I would imagine that less than 100 people do that a season. So they want to know what it's like. And so, coming up with a thumbnail that, honestly, it's a really hard run, so it's probably not the hardest video to come up with a thumbnail for. But those are the types of videos that do well what I'd call evergreen fashion. Like, people, if you're just covering viral outrage, people are going to watch your videos for 2 weeks, then it won't be outrageous anymore, and then they'll never watch that video again. A lot of the videos that honestly have done really well have been the ranking videos, like US ranked, Canada ranked. Right now, the video that I have for Canada ranked, which I put out 4 days ago, has the same amount of views, probably even less views than the video that I put out on Altera's lift line situation. Within the next 6 months, that's gonna reverse, and the Canada ranked video is probably going to have twice as many views, because that is actually helpful to people. The average view duration will, over time, bring that video up to the point where YouTube will keep showing it to people. And then I would also say that, you know, in order to keep the channel growing, you have to have certain videos that appeal to a wide audience not from an emotional standpoint. Actually, I said the pipeline video, but I actually think much better examples of that phenomenon of like keeping people interested and not doing it in a way that attracts clickbait is like, you know, our ski lifts compared video from last March, or our beginner versus intermediate versus advanced videos. Those videos are very useful. They're not there to attract like a clickbaity response. And they do incredibly well over time because they're really useful and they actually help people who are trying to figure out, you know, where they fit in the ski world. The unfortunate thing is that those types of videos are really hard. It's like a canary, or it's like a gold nugget in a gold mine. They're not the easiest to figure out. If more of those video topics existed, if you guys have any ideas, I'm all ears. But I think, you know, in terms of trying to keep as many people as possible on the channel without creating like really clickbaity content, that is something that me and the team are trying to do all the time.
So I guess just one follow-up before we move on. Just for the both of you as well, I know similar to, I'm sure this was the same way, working in the NBA and any sports industry, there's obviously the ski season and then the off season. So there's a lot of the stuff you write more tailored specifically, I imagine, to, hey, okay, you're going on this, to this resort this winter, here are things to know, whereas I'd imagine something maybe not as resort focused for the summer months where people don't have as much access because it's not there's no snow in the resorts and everything like that. So is there a differentiation in content you put out in season during off season?
Yeah, absolutely. So skiing focused specifically, we put out more mountain reviews that we know will be more evergreen during the summer because we don't necessarily need the viral clicks in the same way that the audience might need during like December or January. So if you go back and you see what we put out in August and September, you'll see a lot of videos on like, you know, mountain review of Lutz in Minnesota or Terry Peak, South Dakota, because those videos, if we put them out now, they would tank the channel. You know, like they're great videos, and I think we did a pretty good job with the title and thumbnail too, but just, you know, like given our bandwidth and the amount of people relying on us to put up videos that appeal to a wide audience, we can't really do that during the fall and winter with our current one video a week bandwidth. We're also in the process of expanding into, and this is a much more long-term strategy, but we're in the process of expanding into reviewing national parks as well. And I think there is a similar circumstance where national park videos on YouTube, it is a much bigger audience than skiing. I'm sure that it is going to be hard to break into. But when it comes to national parks, every piece of content that I see has to do with, you know, these are the hikes that you need to do. It's not really a critical assessment of what's actually going on in those parks, beyond political things, which, you know, those do have an impact on the experience, but you don't see videos talking about how at Death Valley, you know, it's impossible to hike after 9 a.m. or, you know, it takes an hour to drive between attractions, so you're gonna be like, it's gonna be a pain in the ass, excuse my language, but if you want to see 4 literal attractions there. So I think there's a market there. I think it's going to be a much longer term, but that is kind of how during the off season we're functioning.
Yeah, so there's 4 intensive months of skiing where most of the operators are running their ski resorts, and that's when I'm doing a lot of skiing. It's during the off seasons that they tend to be able to focus on and announce their big projects, their new chairlifts, who's joining which pass, which is more where my coverage is focused anyway. So it's actually a pretty natural year-round type thing, and I don't find, because of the sorts of stuff I'm writing about, the readership and viewership and listenership doesn't really fall off at all, because I am aiming toward skiers who ski a lot and are very interested in what I'm writing about.
Yeah, so if they're interested in during the ski season, they're going to be there year-round. Gotcha. So now, moving on as well. So, what's the real world impact? So, when they highlight a lot of the consumer unfriendly policies pushing the resort to change, certainly you mentioned about Vail reversing some of their policies, and I think you're elevating the perspectives of everyday skiers and not just marketing a specific resort, which again, obviously a need that people had in the past, not just knowing about the resorts, but hey, let's get down to the actual nuts and bolts of the situation, and also able for anybody to understand the nuances of the resort without needing that insider status and everything like that. Oh, close over. Yeah, sure. We can go to Q&A. Apologies here. All right. Anybody have questions for anything else that was covered in the panel tonight? Any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's really, I know you mentioned the last slide a little bit, but we were talking a little bit about like the importance of independent journalism. I know like obviously like videos, clips online, same as like articles online, that really does influence people's thoughts of where they're going to go skiing that year. You know, I mean, years ago people used to like, they'd open their books, they'd open their encyclopedias, they'd talk to their friends, and that was it when it came to how we're going to choose where to go skiing this year. Whereas now we're seeing so much more people are actually, you know, they're looking online, they're on the likes of TikTok, they're on online blogs, online articles, so we're seeing a massive shift in how people are actually making decisions. So like the fact that people are actually changing the way that they make decisions, like that's changing management as well, which has been really interesting. And then obviously like independent journalism, I love to harp on about how like the media is the public watchdog of the government, of large corporations and everything. So I think it's so interesting to see kind of how like small to medium companies and like, you know, independent journalists are having an effect on the likes of Vail, on the likes of Altera, on the likes of all these different companies. So it's something that is super important, and you know, independent journalism is something that we will need to stay supporting because it's so easy to just kind of disregard it and go off. So it's been really interesting to see from the European perspective, where, you know, in Europe obviously a lot of the ski resorts are predominantly like, you know, local municipality owned or they're locally owned. So it's been great for me to see a massive shift over here. It is a duopoly, and then it can be diminished.
Yeah, just kind of going off of just the independent journalism, I feel like, I know just in other industries as well, and something I have a personal side talking about baseball, that's the industry that I work in, but I think something, I just reminded of, I think independent journalism is a lot similar to the early days of just rock and roll bands back in the 60s, because a lot of the appeal was, oh, all you need is a couple guitars and a drum kit, as opposed to some of this other stuff, you need a whole big band. And I think independent journalism in the same way, especially with the advent of technology and everything like that, seeing people, oh, they've actually found a way to make this a sustainable business, so it's not this lofty goal where you think, oh, I'm in this private equity, for example, in New York City, I'd love to do this in some capacity, but I really don't have the steps to do that. So I think what you're able to do is just give people the platform, or give people the vision to say, hey, this actually is something that's not only attainable and as well as sustainable. So, are there any other questions? Go ahead, Sarah.
This might be challenging because you guys are kind of split between my question, but I'm curious, like, I noticed, like, Sam, you're doing a lot of videos, whereas you're doing a lot more, like, in the podcast space and written. Are you seeing people's behaviors change in terms of the kind of content that they want to engage with? Or I think it's just interesting you guys are covering a very similar topic using different mediums. And I'm curious how you've sort of seen people's engagement with those different mediums change over time.
I can absolutely say that is the case. And with TikTok, Instagram Reels, those have been the two biggest places where people are engaging more. We have seen phenomenal growth on both of those platforms by posting daily. And basically, people just don't have the attention spans that they used to. So that's been helping from a, I think, growth standpoint. You don't really make any money off that content, but you know, since we're already making long form, it doesn't take as much work as it would for the typical channel to just turn some of that into short form. But yeah, I would absolutely say that there are more people interacting with Reels and with TikTok. I don't know if with YouTube I've seen quite as much of that. I think maybe the one thing is actually with podcasts, people like listening to podcasts on YouTube, and I think Stu actually has quite a bit to say about that.
Yeah, we recently ported the podcast over to YouTube, and Sam's been very helpful with helping us gain a little traction over there. So we have a video version of it. So in that way, yes, I was following global trends to where I saw it going. Most of my audience is still listening. You know, I've taken a little bit of a different path, I think. Rather than trying to expand the brand onto different things, I've kind of retreated back into the newsletter, because the business model is paid subscriptions, and the voice in the newsletter is the most important thing. And I've actually had pretty good luck with long form, and I think because no one's really doing it anymore, there is still that audience that wants that. And it actually corresponds pretty well with the audience that's willing to pay for that kind of thing. I've actually really stepped back from social media, particularly Twitter. You know, maybe it's just me. It seems as though some of the platforms have gotten quite toxic, and it's just not. It's not a good use of my time. Now, I have started advertising on the social platforms with the help of a digital marketing agency, but that doesn't require any interaction. This is driving people to the content. I would say that there's no way I could have created this without social media, but now I've reached a place where it can exist within its native ecosystem. And it's interesting, the open rate of my emails, which is my main success metric, besides paid subscribers, has stayed pretty constant for 6 years, even as the audience has grown. So email still surprisingly works. I know there's also a Substack app that pushes it to people, and some folks use that, but yeah, I don't know, that doesn't really answer your question, but it does get back to my point of, like, the most important thing with a newsletter is the content itself. Thanks, guys.
Question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so first of all, Sam, just want to say, all those lodging offers that you get from the ski resorts that you turn down, I'm happy to take those offers. I'm happy to just do a solid one for you on that. God, yeah, so many questions for you guys. I guess just first real quick, I feel like nobody reads anymore. So you kind of started out reading, and then you moved into the podcast world. Writing. You're still going, you say you're kind of retreating to Substack and the writing. I feel like you have branched out a little bit more onto newsletter style. I don't know, I'm getting your emails and your articles that you're writing. Are you finding that people have shorter attention spans these days and just want to listen and watch as opposed to read? How have you kind of dealt with that?
Excuse me. I can tell you what I think has worked really well for me, and maybe Stu as well. I find that if I put a lot of pictures in my articles, people will stay engaged. I've seen that basically I went from basically copying and pasting the scripts of my videos with absolutely no pictures and, probably not getting that much attention on those scripts to, like, basically putting a picture every 2 paragraphs. That has been great from an attention standpoint, but it's also created problems in that, our team is still figuring out how to allocate bandwidth there, because it now takes 5 times longer to get an article up on the website. So if you guys, honestly, some of you guys might be, seeing this and thinking about how we haven't gotten any of our Europe reviews up on the website. We haven't gotten most of our South America content up there either, or any of the past 3 video scripts. That is because it is just really hard to prioritize actually getting that up there. But if we just copied and pasted it as a Word document, no one would read it. So It's like, I'd rather get like, a little bit of content out there that people want, and also hopefully, like over the next couple of weeks even, like hire someone who will actually be able to, dig through that backlog and get us more current. But yeah, like I think with articles, actually creating those visuals so people feel like they're watching it, even though they're not, and then also having captions under those, like pictures so people can kind of skip through and still get the gist of the summary of what's happening. I found that to still work quite a bit.
So I find that people do still read, and there's two ways to make them do that. Anyone who reads my newsletter knows that my other great love besides skiing is University of Michigan football. So I don't know if there's anyone here who's familiar with MGO blog, but it's a blog that covers Michigan sports. And Michigan's official athletic site is mgoblue.com, so they're MGO blog. They have a lot of articles on there, and there's one guy, the founder, Brian, that I read everything he writes because it's funny and it's interesting. I don't read the recruiting stuff, I don't read the game, I don't read the things that are very dense and that are not entertaining, but my whole driving philosophy is skiing is fun, reading about it should be too, and as long as it's a little entertaining, which I can't always do, but I try, I find that people do engage and they do read, because in the way that my biggest tell on that is typically the upper part of the article's free, and then 6-8 paragraphs down there's a paywall. So if people are paying, that means they're reading to the paywall and want more. And consistently when there's a paywall, I'll pick up more paid subscribers. So that's the first thing that tells me. And I've also done a lot of what Sam says, which is adding visuals. And a big part of the storm has been creating data and putting it all together and making charts, which I don't always know the best way to display, but it's a work in progress. And I find that it breaks up the story nicely. And I also hate staging things, and it takes up like half my life. So we need AI to help with that pretty soon.
This is the last question.
Yeah, last question.
Thank you. Hey, my name is JT. First off, just want to thank you guys for being here. This is really educational. I'm a big ski lift nerd, doppelmayer, Palma, everything, So I guess my question kind of comes from Stu. Your mention about how the high-speed rope tow kind of helped to act as solving an issue in kind of twofold way. And given the state of the lifts being kind of like a duopoly, one, do you think there's space for other companies to kind of fill the holes left by the high-speed lift companies? And then two, do you think there are more kind of creative approaches to solving lift lines?
Yeah, good questions. As you know, probably Skytrack was that independent operator, and then Leitner Poma bought them, right? And so they were making the fixed grip lifts, the budget alternative. So right now we're left in this place where you have these two big companies that are, although they're independent, they're really American subsidiaries of European companies, right? So they're very reliant still on things that come from Europe. They're both right now getting hit pretty bad by tariffs. So that's one thing that anyone's gonna have to consider is there a way to make some of that stuff here? So far the answer is that some of it is just very specialized and needs to be made elsewhere. I've talked to, there's a lot happening behind the scenes of people who are interested in the ski industry, who have interest in it, who aren't aligned with Baylor or Altera, who are looking for solutions, talking to companies in Turkey, for example, and China. Again, you start to run into the tariff issue, but is there a simpler machine out there that they can make that can help to fill that market gap? I just today was talking to the fellow who runs a little ski company actually in upstate New York called Partech, and that's a successor to Borvig Lifts, which his father started. And he's getting a little older, but he still makes a couple lifts a year. And he has all the bones, everything in place. He has the facilities, he just doesn't have the scale. So what I think the most feasible future for the affordable chairlift is for someone with some sort of capital to come in and take Partech and scale it, and realize that you can have, you know, McDonald's built this global empire not on good food but on cheap bad food, right? So you can certainly scale things that are a lower version of something to be big. So someone will emerge. I think the need is there. As far as lift lines go, I mean, I'm sure you all have your examples. I think the standard for running lift lines is Alta, where they have everyone lined up, they say front row come forward, they fill them from the singles line, and nothing goes up after it. They're very good at it. Palisades Tahoe is another one that's very good at it. If you want to see terrible lift line management, just go to Pennsylvania, anywhere, and you have a combination of bad skiers and, you know, they're like teenage lift operators, and they're just not bringing it together. So it all comes down to training. And I was actually had a podcast interview today with the guy who runs Blue Mountain, Ontario. And he was like, yeah, our lift lines are terrible and we don't know what to do about it, but we have some ideas. A lot of that comes from volume. But it's really, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, I point out the problem and then you try to figure out who's doing it the best. And some ski areas are great at it. They tend to be better at the big places out west, I find, just because there is so much volume. In the Northeast, things get a little dicey.
Besides that big season, start investing in ski tech. It's all the big season now, straight from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Stuart probably answered it as best as I could. Yeah, there is certainly an issue when it comes to the ability to purchase like a high quality ski lift here, especially compared to Europe. I'm actually working on a piece right now where Europe just has such superior access to high quality lifts. And I think a lot of it does have to do with the fact that the specialists are there. There's a whole history as to why that's the case. But yeah, I think over the next 5 years, resorts are gonna have to figure something out. Exactly as Stu said, we're in a place where a lot of resorts have lifts that need to be replaced and they need to figure out how to do it and they don't have a solution to do it. I think in addition to those fixed grip lifts that were built in the 60s and 70s, detachable lifts have a lower lifespan, at least from the 80s and 90s. And actually, like for example, Vail Resorts has over 24 lifts that are detachable quads. I think just detachable quads, I don't think any of their six packs are at that age yet, but detachable quads that are basically reaching the end of their life cycle and they haven't figured out what to do to replace them yet. So that is a crisis that is hitting Vail. It's going to hit Altera as well. And yeah, they're gonna have to figure out what to do. And yeah, we'll see what happens.
So that's everything. Appreciate you all coming out, and Sam, we're just gonna have some time just mingle afterwards. Good. Yep. So I have the space till 9. So if you want to hang out, just discuss things of that nature. But really appreciate you all coming out. Yeah. You plan on having more things like this in the future? Yeah. So stay tuned. Appreciate it.